subject of modulation. And modulation is basically just from moving from one tonality to another tonality. We know that from the textbook, right? So I'm going to give you an example here of a very simple modulation. This was the kind of modulation that you would have seen all the time in the Baroque period. It's simple modulation because we can get from two very closely related keys. Not only does it make a whole lot of melodic and harmonic sense, but it also fits in very well to that idea of mean tone temperament, right? So let's use the keys of C and G, getting easily, right, from let's say C major to G major by way of the pivot chord, which is the major modulatory device. This is something that the book didn't really talk about, and I'm kind of disappointed that it didn't talk about this, but we'll talk about it now. C and G are only different by one note, right? And of course we all know that. That's the F sharp. But because they're only different from one note, they share a million chords, okay? But the chord functions are different in each key, right? So let's take for example the note or the chord A minor. In C major, that has a pretty strong tonic function, right? But in the key of G major, it's the 2 chord, right? That A minor, which makes it subdominant, okay? Now remember our rule that the subdominant really wants to move to the dominant, okay? So because, right, I know my rules of voice leading, or not voice leading, sorry, modulation, I'm getting all mixed up, then I can get very easily from one key to another, and I'll just play the example first. Okay, right? And so what I did there was a one chord, moving to the 6th chord, which is still tonic, but let's assume that we go immediately to the key of G. We're in the subdominant now, which leads very nicely to the dominant, or the dominant 7, to what is our new tonic, which is G. But our ear retains the information of that initial C chord and that gravitation to the C chord. So if I were to begin the phrase again, it would sound very natural coming back, right? And it does. It sounds very natural. Okay? And those were all chords specific to C major, that set right there. So I hope this makes sense to you. Let's say then that we need to get from a minor key to a major key. And again, we're going to stay very simple for right now, okay? And we're going to get from A minor to C major, okay? Now, A minor, the rules are for the most part the same, right, as far as your tonic, subdominant, and dominant chords, okay? So if I improvise something, and it's not that much of an improvisation, I do this all the time to show my students. Okay? Let's say that's my first phrase, right? All in the key of A minor. Nothing crazy going on there, all right? But let's examine the 4 chord in the key of A minor, which is the D minor chord. Subdominant in A minor. It is also a subdominant chord in C major, right? So it will work very well of getting to a dominant in C major, then cadencing on the C major tonic, the C chord, right? So I'm going to go from A minor, there we go, A minor, the tonic in A minor, to the subdominant B minor chord, the 4 chord, which is also the 2 chord in C major, to the 5 chord in C major, the G chord, or the G7, both will work fine, the G7, right, to C major. And now listen to how that works. I can't remember exactly what I did as far as the improvisation, but the first melody I play is going to be all in A minor. The second melody I play is going to move from A minor to C major, okay? Again, it sounds very natural. If you look at the Bach minuets, the G major and then the G minor, which aren't really Bach, but who cares, that's very much the pattern of the G minor minuet, which is the right. If you look at the second phrase, that is how Bach, although it's a little bit more inventive, than mine was. That's how he gets from one to another. Okay, but of course we're not really dealing with the Baroque period anymore. We're dealing with the classical period, right? So, and in the classical period, we have very well established well temperament, right? And even in some cases, equal tone temperament. I think we could argue that equal tone temperament was probably beginning, the ideas of it were beginning to be developed. So, what we see very frequently in the classical period, and I'll play you an example, and if I make some mistakes, you'll have to forgive me. I'm doing this extemporaneously, as I usually do. But let's say I'm in F minor, right, and I want to go through a broad series of scales, right, sometimes very unrelated scales. I can do that by way of various 5/7 chords, okay? So for instance, let's say I'm playing, and I'm ending up in C flat major after all of that. Now I know there were some mistakes in there, and I apologize greatly for those mistakes. My brain wasn't working quite as fast as my hands. But I ended up as far away, pretty much as far away as you can get from F minor using immediate 5/7 chords, right? Going from an F minor chord immediately to an F dominant 7 chord. Which leads, of course, F7 is the dominant of B flat. Now it could be B flat minor or B flat major. Let's say B flat minor, right? Using the same voice leading, I can make it a B flat dominant 7th chord. Right? B flat is the dominant of E flat. Let's say E flat major. Right? Now I can go to the E flat dominant 7th chord, right? Which is the dominant 7th of A flat. Let's say A flat minor, just for the heck of it. Right? I can now make that an A flat dominant 7th chord, which will lead to D flat, let's say major. To the D flat 7 chord, which leads to G flat. G flat dominant 7 leads to C flat. Right? And this is something that we see very frequently, especially in the Mozart G minor symphony. Leonard Bernstein does an amazing analysis of it in his lectures at Harvard, and if any of you saw my videos on linguistic discoveries in the 18th century, I cite his lectures at Harvard as a resource, for understanding it. And of course, I mean, Leonard Bernstein is a scholar way above and beyond anything that I can do and I can relate. But this does happen in the classical era, certainly, and it happens because of well temperament and even tone temperament when it originated. And I don't remember when even tone temperament came about. Certainly well temperament